Startups are a roller coaster. They are the highest of highs, the lowest of lows, and those can be moments apart from each other. You're almost a 24-hour day. So there's that kind of grind that you just have to put in the early days, and you have to really find people that are willing to do that and do it with a smile on their face. Like that's kind of a unique person. And so there's that magic of getting that team together and doing those things in the early days. You know, I always call it whack-a-mole. It's like just problem after problem after problems. You know, they say that when women give birth, the body releases a hormone which makes them forget how painful it was. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a second kid. Totally. And I kind of think startups the same way. Like you forget how painful.
Absolutely.
You kind of glass over, you know, rose over the pain, and then you go back through it, and you're like, well, man, I forgot how painful this is. It's like it's a journey. But that also is what makes it fun. It's like the roller coaster aspect of it. The highs and the lows, and like that is what ultimately I think that's what we're addicted to. Yeah. That's what I'm addicted to is like that you know, that energy and passion. And
Mike, let's do it. We're here. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
I can't wait. You're a friend of a friend, and he says amazing things, so happy to dive in with you. Mike, for those who don't know, is the founder of a company called Freshly. For anybody who's ever had food delivered directly to their door, they probably know what Freshly is and what it did. Why did you do Freshly?
Yeah, I mean, which is kind of a common theme with me, is I was scratching my own itch. So I moved back to Arizona I was living in New York. Those of you who are from New York or spent time in New York know that like it's a place where no one cooks, so you can develop some very bad eating habits. So I took those eating habits back home with me. Turned 30, realized that like the bad eating habits and kind of life catches up to you. I wasn't able to outwork a bad diet in the gym. Had a good family friend who was an ER doctor by trade, but was got really into anti-aging, which he was a pioneer in it, but really, a big part of that is nutrition. So he was like, you got to start eating better. And he was walking me through this stuff. And I was like, oh man, it's like, write down what I should eat. At the time I had a restaurant. So I was like, I'm just going to give that to my chefs and tell them to make me a bunch of kind of takeout meals. Right. And I'm just going to store them in the fridge. And that way I was busy and I was just solved my own problem of basically creating, like a healthy meal plan, doing none of the work. And fast forward 30 days, I've lost 15 pounds. I'm in the best shape of my life. I feel great. What I didn't realize is how it makes sense, obviously now for sure, but your energy levels, like your mood, how well you sleep is all predicated on, or largely predicated on your nutrition. It's garbage in, garbage out. And so just started doing that for myself. And then people saw the results and were like, what are you doing? And I told them, and they're like, can you do it for me? And I was like, yeah, for sure. And so kind of started getting some traction there. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to fire out an email. I'm going to put up like a crappy, this was pre even Shopify. So it was like a crappy site. And sent out an email to, this was Tucson, Arizona. Sent out emails like 50 people and got $2,000 in sales. And I was like, so that was like, it was like the light bulb moment went off, where it's just like, wow, this has a potential of being something real. So that's how it was really started around. Just like, again, I think that's where we were really successful, is like we knew what our mission was, is make it easy to eat healthy. And that's like what it always was, from day one to the day we sold it.
Okay, I want to talk about this thing of the early days in Tucson. You put out this email.
Yeah.
A bunch of people signed up. You're like, oh, okay, maybe there's a thing. There's like some semblance of product market fit, but way before you had sort of developed the machine, right? How long did you do the non-scalable thing until you realized like, okay, this is actually a really big business? Yeah,
I mean, I think like, the one thing I'd always say is like startups look very like step functiony in like when you read TechCrunch or these, it's like, it's kind of like a progression of like, we just slowly learned, and I think what we learned was what we just break stuff. So our original idea was like, we're going to partner with gyms and we're going to deliver our food to gyms. And like, that was in theory a great concept, and it just failed for multiple reasons. And it was hard, hindsight, we could predict those, but looking forward, it was hard. So it was like, the gyms would close, the gyms, all these different challenges. So we said, okay, well, we've got to start doing home delivery. And so then we were like, we're going to deliver it ourselves. And so we bought a delivery van and we were delivering. And then we realized like, oh my gosh, delivery is super hard. So then we were like, well, we're going to partner with FedEx. So there was always these like moments where like we thought we knew what we were doing and then we did it and we realized like, oh wow, we didn't know what we were doing. But I think where we were exceptionally good at is like humble enough to know when like a challenge was going to be too big for us to solve, or maybe wasn't core to the business and what our mission was. And so like, let's think of another way to do that. So, I mean, all the way until we sold, it was like just constant evolution of like, you get to a certain point, you break everything, and then now you got to figure a new path forward.
Let's take that idea. I want to run with that a little bit of like, break it, figure it out, learn, fall on your face, iterate, do it again until like at some point you figure out, okay, this thing's working. Like, how do you encourage a lot of our audience is aspiring founders or current founders? Like, how do you encourage founders to have that same mindset as you and not let their like ego get in the way of saying, no, I know this problem. I know it's going to work. I know we should just keep doing the thing, right? Like, I think this is one of the like downfalls of a lot of founders and a lot of companies. Yeah,
I mean, I think so. And again, I think there's all sorts of founders. So I think this thing gets kind of bucketed into. So there's founders of smaller kind of what I would say like lifestyle or family run businesses, which is still a founder, but generally it's not about like venture style. We're going to grow this thing. We're going to just really rip it.
Yeah.
So what I know the best is that latter. So I'll speak to that. But I think a lot of different people can be successful founders. You just got to make sure you find the path that's right for you and what you want, your personality.
Well said.
From a venture standpoint, what I've generally seen, and then this is painting with broad strokes, so this is not an absolute, but generally what I've seen with really successful venture founders is they're paranoid. They constantly feel that like, they're paranoid on everything. They're paranoid they're not doing a great job. They're paranoid that the competitors are going to get them. They're paranoid that the large competition is going to come. They live in a constant state of panic. So you're constantly like just figuring things out and working those through. And they're the biggest optimists in the world. So you would generally say, okay, those are kind of three kind of juxtaposed positions, but they believe the world's going to get better. They believe they can manifest that. But they're constantly worried about all the things that are going wrong. So and I basically put that bucket into one word, which is urgency. So if you have a sense of urgency, and it's an artificial urgency, because there's like, in most startups, and I'm sure there are some startups but in most startups, no one's going to die if you don't do X, right? But a founder who's amazing does feel like someone's going to die if you don't do X, and they live with that urgency. I think that kind of mindset is really important. If you're doing a venture style, which is more of like a very rapid growth, to some degree, highly disruptive business. And you tend to take on larger incumbents and people with more money. So there tends to be, challenges, and there tends to be more money invested in you, which then definitely lays in kind of more expectations.
Super interesting. I think there's a lot of parallels in entrepreneurship and like sports. I'm a big sports guy. And one of them is fighting, the UFC. And you're familiar with Conor McGregor,
yeah.
Obviously. And Conor McGregor, I think, had some of these traits that you're talking about, specifically eternally optimistic, super confident in himself, right? And he's taking over the UFC. Eventually, he makes a few $100 million. He starts getting a little bit comfortable, and he goes and fights. It wasn't Eddie Alvarez, but who's the guy that beat him a couple of times recently, back to back?
I'm not a huge UFC fan, but I actually love Conor, but I don't know who he.
So it was. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, but anyways, I remember in a press conference this guy saying like, "This guy is not going to beat me waking up every day in silk sheets and silk pajamas," right? Yeah. And it's true. He came out and he looked a little bit off, and so I think my question for you is, now you've had some success, some real success. Now you're doing another company. Like, do you feel like you have that same founder urgency and the same sort of paranoia and panic and optimism that you're talking about today that you did, the first or second time?
I do. I mean, but I also think you have to create that same you have to bring back that same level of humility, and you have to craft a life there. So you have to, for me, it's like back on the train, back early mornings, late nights. Like you got to work the hours, you got to put in the work. I think, and again, very very similar to boxing or professional sports, but UFC in this example is like, just because you're successful doesn't mean you get a pass, right? So you got to put in the work, you got to put in the hours. And so just like you see great fighters, what do they do before a big match? They go to some log cabin in the middle of nowhere and train for 5 months and completely remove themselves from those comforts. And I think that's what you have to do. If your mindset is when you go back to a founder or an early stage startup versus a late stage startup, there's different perks, different amenities that so you got to be lean and scrappy at that small stage, and then you build on that. But if you start off kind of sloppy at a high stage, then it's harder to course correct. I think that's some of the challenges we certainly saw in 2020, 2021 with kind of the abundance of capital that was being put into startups. Is you kind of start off sloppy, just because capital. Yeah, a great smart guy who early investor in ours said, you will spend to the amount of money you raise. Like, so you have 10,000, you'll spend accordingly. Yeah. If you have 100,000, you'll spend accordingly, but you just raise because you stop. If you have 10 million in the bank, you don't worry about the $5,000 check. If you have 10,000 in the bank, you agonize over that 5,000 check. And it's that discipline of managing kind of those small numbers at the beginning, which gives you that discipline as you grow. Amazing.
So I want to go back to, part of these beginnings. So you do this initial email, things start, you have some semblance of like things working. Like, what'd you do next?
So it started growing, and so first of all, I had to. Then I think this is always the founder's dilemma: is you got to start convincing people that you're going to build something great. So first thing was I convinced my co-founder Carter Comstock, who ultimately joined me, and I recruited him. He was working at ADP in Texas, and Carter was much more of an adamant health and nutrition. Like I'm not. I'm our target customer. Carter was really more of like. He geeked out on health and wellness. It was really his thing. So I recruited him to join as co-founder and employee number one, and he took a huge gamble and came out. So that's almost always where it starts. Is you gotta start recruiting people and talent to join you on that journey, and you often don't have a lot to give them, and you really got to sell them on that vision. So got him. We were very lean and scrappy at the beginning, so we didn't raise really any outside capital for a while until we took a jump into the next facility. It was the first time we kind of started raising outside capital. But yeah, so it was just about like getting people and then signing people up for hard work. We did all of our production out of my restaurant. And so in order to hit kind of production schedule, we started producing at 3 a.m. So everyone had to be there at 3 a.m. and then we'd work through right before lunch. So we opened for lunch at the restaurant. So to about 11, and we had to be kind of all the way out of there for the restaurant. Now, half of us were then working in the restaurant. So like so a lot of my cooks and stuff I recruited in. So we literally, our head chef who ended up joining us over at Freshly, but he worked from, there's a few days he worked from 3 a.m. till 12 at night. So you're almost a 24-hour day. So there's that kind of grind that you just have to put in the early days, and you have to really find people that are willing to do that and do it with a smile on their face. Like that's kind of a unique person. And so there's that magic of getting that team together and doing those things in the early days.
Is there some way to identify who those people are before you actually hire them?
Yeah, so it's a term I don't know. Like I always say, it's a grinder. It's some like so I just generally think like people either are or aren't grinders. Like you can, and you can. There's many different things in this. So I generally think people that have done sports successfully that generally it requires that same level of grind. People, if you're not sports, people who have succeeded in other aspects, whether it's academics or things like that, you just need someone who says like they just put their head down and they just don't complain. And you know when you see it, but it's like it's hard. Like just I can pretty quickly identify with a handful of questions on an interview is like, is this person going to be a grinder? Or if your first question is what's the work-life balance, it's going to be hard. You're not going to fit my category of a grinder.
Totally. We always got made fun of or complimented, depending on who it was. But when we would go to events, like me and our whole sales team were always like the most jacked guys at these events. And we had a couple of guys that were just like insane. And so people would come by and be like, is this like a bodybuilding show or are you guys, but it was that, right? Like when somebody comes in and they're in good shape, you know, like, okay, you grind, you put in the work clearly. You know, and that was always an indicator for me of somebody that was like a true hustler.
Yeah, it's like combination, discipline, hard work, effort. Like it's a combination. I kind of feel like a grinder encapsulates all those things.
Yeah.
Like they just are willing to put in the work. And it's, again, I use a lot of sports metaphors as well, but like the big one for me is reps, right? You got to put in the reps. You want to be good at basketball, you got to shoot a lot of shots. You want to be great at tennis, you got to hit a lot of balls. You want to, like, there's no shortcut, like in all these things. Like, and I think, you know, business is the same. Like there's like, it's, you know, it's ultimately it's an hours game. And it's like the person who's willing to put in the most hours is going to have the highest correlation with the person who's the most successful. You know, can you get lucky? Of course, but you can go buy a lottery ticket and win there as well. So, you know, if you're generally playing the rules, it's about putting in the hours. And yeah, I generally think when you're starting a new business, when you're learning, when you're like, you just have to really absorb and you can excel. You know, again, if you're working a 12-hour day and your competitor's working an 8-hour day, you know, I'll lap you pretty quickly. So, you know, that's always been my motto.
Yeah, really good. Now, did you guys have any sort of first mover advantage at Freshly? Were you one of the first to market, or were there competitors already out there shipping direct to consumer?
So we didn't. I mean, we kind of did and didn't. I mean, there was an evolution and a few players that were ahead of us. They were a little different. So like Blue Apron, HelloFresh were ahead of us. They were meal kits, so they were like sending you raw groceries. There was a company called Munchery, which ended up closing down, but they were gaining a lot of traction, primarily in San Francisco. At the time, they were only in San Francisco. Little differentiated model. Ours was, you know, we ended up kind of being a hybrid between Munchery and Blue Apron. So we were first from the exact approach we had. I think one of the things you learn in food is that the competitive landscape in food is, you know, we used to call it share stomach, but it's pretty broad in that like your direct competitor is a competitor, but so is like your non-direct customer, because it's substitution factor. So who are people going to choose you over? And a lot of times that was, you know, your grocery store that had prepared meals or something like that. So yeah, we weren't the first people by any means to, you know, we didn't invent the prepared meal. We were coming late to the game there. Yeah, really interesting. And how were you able to, like, maybe take us through the way that you were able to ultimately start gaining like mass traction? Did you go raise a bunch of money and then just start marketing directly to consumers, or were there sort of creative ways that you started to really gain traction? There was really two. I can think of two moments, and I'm sure there's more, but I can think of two kind of pivotal moments which really made a transitional shift in our trajectory. Because ultimately we were able to raise a significant amount of capital, but that came kind of in result to our rapid growth. And really the first one was switching to FedEx, or a third-party logistics, it was FedEx at the time, to do our delivery. And what that immediately gave us was, we were in Arizona, we were just delivering to Arizona, and that immediately gave us within basically a 500-mile radius we picked up. We were in Phoenix at the time, we'd moved the business up to Phoenix. So that gave us Las Vegas, all of the LA market, San Diego, all just from just shipping out of our location through FedEx, overnight or 2-day delivery. So all of a sudden we went from, you know, Arizona's plus minus 10 million people to all of a sudden 5x that population that we were serving. And we could all now ship, you know, all through Arizona as well. So, you know, if you were in, you know, I grew up in a tiny town called Sonoita, no problem. We could serve you food. So that really took off an exponential kind of map. That was kind of number one. And then the second thing we realized, and this was kind of and this was a crazy thing. I was just flying back from New York actually to Arizona, flying over Texas. I still remember, and I was looking down at I-10, and I was like, you know what? I think we can first mile ship a refrigerated truck from our location into Dallas, Texas, and that would pick us up all the Texas market, but in other locations. So we started doing our own first mile logistics. So that was a big changer as well, because now what we did is we took, at the end, we took our location in Phoenix, and we were now shipping we were shipping trucks to Dallas, Texas, up to San Francisco, up to Denver. So we had, I think just out of our Phoenix location, I think we had like 8 different truck lines that we shipped kind of ourselves. And then we would drop that at a FedEx. So that, again, it was all about geographic. It was being able to reach more people from one hub. So if you think about like the challenges of a restaurant is your restaurant's going to only service, a 5-mile radius, 10-mile radius around you.
Yeah.
So you think about that restaurant and then now say, okay, well now it's a 500-mile radius of people that you can sell to. So that demand just went up, exponentially. So those were the 2 biggest step functions where like overnight there was just like a massive invert to our growth curve.
Yeah. Now I know that not all growth is linear up and to the right. I think most aren't, except for a few rare examples over the last few decades, right? Maybe describe a time, given the theme of our podcast being the roller coaster, right? The way that I always describe it is that everybody ebbs and flows in their life. Everybody has highs and lows. But like if this was 1 year, the highs and lows sort of look like this. Whereas in a startup that same year, it's sort of more like a heart rate monitor, right? You could be at the peak of the mountain and also facing the floor in the same period of a few hours in the same day, multiple times, right? So was there a day or, a moment in time, a week, a month inside of the company where you had these extreme sort of highs and lows?
I mean, there was, I think, millions. I think you nailed it. Is that startups are that name of the podcast? Startups are a roller coaster. They are the highest of highs, the lowest of lows, and those can be moments apart from each other, right? I think some examples that just come immediately to the top of my mind is. So a lot of ours tended to be around these step functions on supply and basically scaling to where we broke everything. And so when we first started shipping, we were shipping with dry ice and so we learned, we didn't know this at the time, the naivety of a young founder, but dry ice actually, if you get into scale on dry ice, it's nitrogen and CO2, and CO2 actually, so dry ice releases gas over time as it becomes hard and it goes back to a gas. And so what happens is the CO2 actually builds from the ground up. So CO2 is not like, so it's a denser than oxygen. So, but CO2 is very dangerous because so anyways, long story short, we got to a point that we were using so much dry ice and we didn't have the proper ventilation because we didn't know any of this, that we almost had people passing out because we were all of it, because it kind of hits you all of a sudden. So our first location, how we broke that location and just broke everything in it. And it was just we took it to such a limit. When we originally got that location, we thought, okay, we're going to do about 3 million out of this location. When we finally left that location, we were doing close to 15 million at that location. So we went 5x what we thought was going to be our max out of that location. And but then when we to our new location, we stepped up. We went from, basically a 9,000 square foot location to an 80,000 square foot location, right? And so we had all new equipment, we had all new. So that was, and that to my co-founder, God bless him, was responsible for opening that. And so it was just an unmitigated disaster. It was everything that can go wrong went wrong. We still did an amazing job. We got all the food out, but it was insanely taxing. And that, is, a lot of you have followed Elon Musk, and it was, him sleeping in the factories and stuff. It was that equivalent. And so those moments where you're ripping and then all of a sudden the wheels fall off, and you got to keep chugging forward. And I think that was just kind of always our motto is just keep going, and so we fixed things and got it fixing and humming. And then that location, we ultimately said, okay, we're going to get to max in that location. Max we'll get to is basically 100,000 meals a week, which is approximately for us was about $1 million a week in sales out of that location. We ultimately at the end of it, we got that location of 350,000 meals a week out of that location. So 3.5 million just a week out of that location. So it's just optimizing. But it was always I tell people it was as hard. My last week at Freshly, we shipped over 1.1 million meals in a week. And I said that 1.1 was easier than the first 300 when we did 300 meals out of them. So it's all relative. But as a startup, you're learning the skills, the processes, you're putting the things in place to where you get to that level. And it's painful across the entire journey because you're always kind of pushing beyond where you should.
Man, that's a shit ton of meals.
It's a lot of meals.
Oh my goodness. So, one thing we talked about earlier, and I want to pick a little fight with you right now, which is, we talked about, and I'd love to have a debate on this because, one thing you said is the founder that works 8 hours a day versus the founder that works 12 hours a day is going to get lapped, right? Fully agree that, hard work and being fully committed and like killing yourself is definitely in the beginning of doing a startup. You could argue through the life of a startup, very important. I also think that, I had an experience in my life where I did that for almost a decade. Finally had a successful exit, life is good. And then 5 months into the exit, my wife of 10 years almost passed away. And it changed a lot of my perspective on life. And I did a lot through that experience, did a lot of self-reflection on like, have I been a good father? Have I been a good husband? Have I been around? And like all the answers were like, no. And you need to make some changes. And so I ended up leaving the parent company 5 months after the acquisition. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how could I possibly do another company, but maintain some semblance of balance, which is a very unpopular word in Startupville, as you know. And I've come to the conclusion that I believe that founders, maybe it's not all founders, but I think most founders that have some level of balance where they're taking care of their relationships, their health, they're doing hobbies and things they want to do outside of work and maintaining those, spending time with their friends. I think when you maintain the right healthy level of balance, it actually gives you more energy to be more productive when you are working. And I think there's like this energy feedback loop that's really healthy if you can strike the right balance. I also think that that it's actually like humans can only be so productive for so many hours in a day. And so like I remember working these 12 or 15 plus hour days and thinking back and going like, was I actually like moving the needle for half of those hours? I don't know. Probably not, right? So I think the combination of like, can you actually be productive for that long in a day? Plus, do you have a competitive advantage by maintaining some level of balance is like the side that I'm trying to figure out how to get to.
Yeah, so in that you said we were going to debate, I'm definitely going to play the other side here because I think at the end of the day, first of all, there's no singular way of life, period, right? I think like, for sure. And when you say success, and I think this is where people is like, we get to choose our own measuring stick. Like we get to choose what we're measuring our life and success by. And to your point, that life is more than just your work, and it's more than being a founder and those things. And to everyone, you have to balance how you want to prioritize different things in your life. So I fully agree with that. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that like being successful at anything is not necessarily like the life's goal. Now, what I would counter with that is that it depends on if you want to be great or good. And if you look at anything I don't care if it's startup or anything. If you want to take the greatest person at X, they are obsessed. And generally what it means is that what you're good at is also what creates things bad. So if you generally look at people that are absolutely the absolute best, this is a general rule. So there's certainly exceptions. They will generally, if they're great athletes, they will not be great family people. They will not be the best dad. They will not be, because they were just focused purely on their things. If they're great at business, Steve Jobs, any of these guys that were amazing, Elon Musk, arguably the greatest founder ever, you could make some arguments depending on what you defined as success that maybe he's not as successful if you didn't define purely just money and economics.
Very true.
So I think everyone needs to find their balance on that. I don't think there's a wrong or right way, but I think if you want to be the best at anything, it is time, commitment, dedication to that. Now you have to balance in your life is if you get that thing, is that what you ultimately want? If you wake up and I am the biggest fan in the world of Elon Musk, but I wouldn't want Elon Musk's life. It's just not me. It's not worth that. Now, I also recognize that the guy's landing, rocket ships. He single-handedly has built the electric car, industry. He's now solving Twitter. Like the person who does that does not take the weekends off. Yep. It just doesn't work. So I think people want, and I agree to some degree on like the productivity scale and how it drops and all these things. But like, I think we've got into this very hand-holding, like, I think if you want me to look like broadly at like society is like, you can have your cake and eat it too. And you can do these things and you can have work-life balance and these things, and you can, but if you're competing against me, like I'm not playing that game. So that's where I think and that's where, you could say Conor McGregor could say going into that fight, like, hey, I want to spend more time with my kids and my family. You can't necessarily say that's wrong. Yeah. But you say that guy who's fighting you and he was locked up, like he's gonna whoop your ass. Yeah. And I think that to some degree now, again, I do think that like that is a small percentage of people that are going at that. So I don't think like that's right for everyone. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the biggest mistake I see people make is they try to be something they're not and they don't want. And so at the end of the day is like, as you had to learn through kind of facing adversity, is that like, okay, the world you created, the life you created is not actually what you wanted. It was maybe the life you created, but the life you created wanted more family time, wanted to be a better husband, wanted to be a better father. So I think spending a lot of time to curate and craft the life you want is really important. Not get caught up. And this is the problem, is people get caught up in like founders as like, oh, you like, if raise a lot of capital, do whatever, and it's like, no, you just get to an end point and you say like, and you got to just be careful to make sure that's the end point you want.
Yeah, really well said. Really well said. And I think for me it came down to, I've sort of like, you could say made it when it comes to career and profession now, but like, what do I have to show for it other than like more money? Yeah. And I was like, and more fame and more cool in the business world. But it's like, at the end of the day, those things to me weren't filling me. I was like, oh, I'm still kind of empty. Yeah. Like, I don't feel like I have a lot of purpose. Now that I'm here, I've arrived at this sort of thing. And so I think now my work seems to be more fulfilling and more purpose filled because I've corrected some of the things with my family that I think are really filling my soul.
There's an old saying, I'm not going to say it exactly perfectly, but the meanest thing you could do to someone is let them achieve their lifelong goal. Because you get there and you're like, because again, I think this is, everyone, you talk to anyone and this is the treadmill of, the treadmill we're on of life, that it just gets going fast. If I were to make $1 million, if I were to make 10 million, if I were to make 100, if I were to be a billionaire, my life would be great. It's like wherever you arrive, it's you, and then you got to deal with things. So I think for me is like money's a means. I think for me, the fun thing about businesses, and I think this is generally, like, I like creating, I like building things, I like challenging and disrupting. To me, like I'm fortunate that I'm in a position that like money's not a priority and focus for me. Now again, we're successful founders, so that's a luxury you can have to say like, if you talk to the Mike of 8 years ago, that was my goal. It's like, I want to like, but you get there and you realize like, oh, it doesn't solve things. So I think I think everyone needs to find their own balance. Balance is not but I do think, and again, this is where I caution, especially young founders, is like, this is, if you want to be at the top, it's like saying I want to be, I'm a high school basketball player and I want to be in the NBA. And I'm just gonna practice twice a week. And you're like, it could happen. I'm not saying you couldn't, but your chances aren't good. Yeah. Like, so if you want that greatness, now if you're like, look, I'm gonna play in high school and I have fun doing this, and this is like, I like the camaraderie and I like doing this, but like I'm not really going beyond there. Then yes, that's a very different outside of mindset. But like, I think you have to decide where you want to be, and then like again, there is exceptions to every rule, but the rule to me is like, if you're a high school basketball player, you want to be in the pros, you better be at the gym at 10 o'clock at night when everyone else is out on a Friday night.
Fully agree. Yeah. And look, like I love having this debate because it's so deeply baked in me, your side, that I'm trying to convince myself that there's another side. And so I always try to get the perspective of guests too.
Look, I have a family with kids and stuff. So like, I wouldn't, but I'm not, Like I always acknowledge that like I'm on like, certainly I would say in the top quartile of like mindsets, but I'm not that 1%. I'm not like, my goal is not to be Elon Musk. Like now I can admire the crap out of Elon Musk. My goal isn't to be Steve Jobs, but if you are saying I want to be that journey is a very different journey. Now mine is as a hybrid of, I want to be doing these things, but I also want to have a family life. I want to have these different things. I want to be there for my kids. And so it's that balance, but I also have the discussion with my wife that like, I'm not going to be as good as a dad as some, because this is the balance. So, you know, it is, because otherwise I just let her down. And you kind of feel like you're failing everywhere. So it's a little bit of discussing that. And certainly, you know, sometimes I don't win all those debates and arguments. So sometimes I get told to do things differently.
So eventually Freshly takes off, starts growing like crazy. And ultimately it's successfully acquired by Nestle. I mean, maybe the juggernaut of sort of food and beverage worldwide. Talk to us about sort of how that all went down and why you chose to sell the company. Yeah.
So, I mean, so first of all, our relationship with Nestle started in 2017. And so we met the guy who was leading, at the time it was the foods division, I believe. It later merged into a larger division, but Jeff Hamilton was leading the foods division. We got introduced to him and really, I think, had a symbiotic view on where food was going to go. You know, I think Nestle is certainly, they are the largest food company out there. They have, to some degree, they have some legacy products out there that they're thinking through and how to evolve those. But so we saw a very symbiotic relationship. They ended up wanting to kind of acquire us at that point, or at least we're interested in that. And we said, we're not for sale, but we'd love to have you as an investor. And they, to their credit, and to Jeff's credit primarily, they fixed that and really got in as an investor, and really it was a very, like, generally sometimes you can get, you know, a big strategic like that, and there's all sorts of kind of challenging getting the docs. It's a very clean deal, which basically meant it was almost like a handshake deal. It's like, hey, we're going to both do these things. We had an amazing relationship with them for, you know, better part of 3 years from their investment. Went through COVID, which was a kind of you know, it was as it was for everyone. It was just, you know, getting it from all over. Net, it ended up being a good thing for the overall business because people were stuck at home and we were producing food, and that we were one of the ways people, especially older populations, could really get safe food. And we were really proud of our ability of what we were able to do with nursing homes and different things. So net, it was a great result. We were already preparing a process to potentially go public. So we started ramping that up towards the back of 2020, and we were actually approached by another company to acquire us, and that kind of set out a formal process. And we ended up getting a deal that, you know, was a game changer enough for us that it felt like it was the right time to kind of take that step. The other journey for us was going public, and, you know, it's kind of at that point it was having a bunch of our leadership team, our founders, and I think equally our investors, and just seeing where they were and what they were thinking. And I think, you know, at this point, all of our investors and largely our employees were you know, going to make a lot of money. And you know, especially for employees who've been on the journey for a long time, I think this is what people don't, is like, you may technically be worth a lot, but that worth is like, you got 90. So that liquidity event is massive for people. And I think, you know, there became a momentum, and it made a lot of sense for us. And it was the right right thing for us to do. Yeah, I guess it was the end of October 2020 is when we sold to Nestle.
I mean, the timing maybe couldn't have been better. We sold our company exactly 1 year later, October 21. And we felt like that was really good timing, but somewhere in between there was like the precise right timing to exit the company.
I mean, it certainly from our side point, I mean, the world changed. You know, I don't think there was, again, I think the last few years, including, you know, starting with COVID, and then the last few years had just been this like insane kind of unpredictable. Yeah. And I think, you know, startups generally as you said, the highest highs, lowest lows. They generally follow those curves like really like at the forefront. So I think this year, for these last 3 years, I'm friends with a lot of founders, I'm sure you are, have just been just a tough 3 years. And again, I think there's highs in there, but there's been also like lows and confusion and chaos and fear and all those things that founders kind of go through. I think they've been heightened these last kind of 2-3 years.
Yeah. So you sold the company for $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Well, how was that structured? Can you talk about the structure of that deal? Was it?
I can't talk about the structure.
Some stock, some cash.
Yeah, I can't. I'm gonna have to plead the fifth here.
But net, a lot of money on the table, and I think that's probably one of the things that founders like dream of, is not just to amass personal wealth, but it's like to see so many other people amass wealth through the thing that you guys all collectively came together and did, right? So kudos to you and the team and being able to pull that off. It's amazing. Now you have this exit. You don't have to do anything after that. You could literally just say, I'm going to just go buy a palace on the beach and I'm going to move my family there and we're going to have our butlers and our maids and we're just going to have this dreamy life, right? And I think perception outside looking in, a lot of people think like that's what you would do but like the way we're wired is not so, right? So why did you decide to do it again? Like, why are you back in the seat, being a founder and building?
Yeah, I mean, I think these things are, one, I just know myself and I have a tremendous amount of energy and things and to save my wife the frustration of me being at home, which would be not fun. I really wanted to put my energy into something. Petfolk kind of came around, I think, very similar to Freshly, which was, it was a pain point. I'd got a dog in New York and I was just really frustrated with how the vet ecosystem was working. My sister's a 25-year plus vet. And she really had this vision and we were talking and she was telling me the vision and I was like, we need to do that. I was like, this is like, I'm telling you, I always like businesses where like, I don't know anything about those businesses except from a customer point of view. So I always say like at Freshly, I was our first customer. I like the hair club for men that, I'm not only the president, I'm the first customer. That's always been my role, like a company is like, I see the lens through a consumer. And so my sister told me her vision of what she wanted to build and how she thought a modern veterinary practice should look and feel and why it was important and all these things. And, as an avid pet lover and pet owner my entire life, I grew up in a ranch in Southern Arizona. I was like, yes, like sign me up. Like this is so. I was fortunate that I had a big exit and I could basically kind of fund this idea and do this. And then I realized that like as you build and scale, that I was really originally I was just going to be kind of an investor and kind of their advice, and then I realized that like. Yeah, first of all, as an operator, I tend to want to operate. But I also realized like I had 5 years of like the best knowledge you could get on how to scale and build. And so so I was like, I discussed with my sister and I said like, look, we should co-CEO. Really my role is more as the COO, CFO in this role. She's really it's her vision, it's her. So I'm technically co-founder, but this one I'm borrowing because it's really her founding vision. And it's one of those things like it's fun. And the challenge is it's challenging, but it's fun. And we've been able to recruit an amazing team. And like, I get so much energy off doing these things and being around people and being around smart people and having fun and going to the office. I'm an old butts and seats guy. Some of the team doesn't like that I'm a butts and seats guy because we have people back in the office, but like, I like that energy. I really enjoy it. So I think, hindsight, I joke with everyone. I was like, I should have probably taken a little bit of a break because I literally, like my last day at Nestle was my first day at Petfolk. So it was like, there was not a fun, but it's been a ton of fun. And you realize though, and this is kind of speaking to, startups are all the same, and it doesn't matter. Like, I definitely know a lot of the things that to watch for and how to manage those, but you're starting all over again. So you're building all the processes. I always call it whack-a-mole. It's like just problem after problem after problem. So it's funny because like coming back through now being back in the startups, I joke with my wife all the time. I'm like, oh, I had no idea. I didn't know what I was getting into again. It was like, oh man, it's like back to this. It's like they say that when women give birth, the body releases a hormone which makes them forget how painful it was. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a second kid. Totally. And I kind of think startups the same way. Like you forget how painful.
Absolutely.
You kind of glass over. Rose over the pain, and then you go back through it, and you're like, well, man, I forgot how painful this is. It's like it's a journey. But that also is what makes it fun. It's like the roller coaster aspect of it. The highs and the lows and the that is what ultimately I think that's what we're addicted to. Yeah. That's what I'm addicted to is like that energy and passion. And they say again, the analogy back to professional sports, who are a lot cooler than me for sure. But they say that's why it's hard for professional athletes to leave because you can't go and get that high anywhere else.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably similar for me. So hopefully the next one I'll take a break after. After this one I'll take a little bit of a break.
We'll see.
Maybe
I
not.
guess. No, I think there's no, even on your second one, there's got to be some advantages now knowing what you know. But there's also on the same front no silver bullets. So you still have to do the work.
Yeah.
But that being said, let's pretend either you get to the end of the road with Freshly and the whole company implodes, you go to zero, you walk away with nothing. But you got the same experience that you got having had the exit, right? So you were fortunate to have really, really nice exit. Doing it the second time, like what sort of advantages do you feel like you have now as a founder, knowing what you know from doing Freshly?
I mean, so, Freshly was my first journey. So everything was new. And I think one of the challenging things as a startup, as you grow rapidly, is your job is constantly evolving, but no one's there to train you. So you're learning on the job. So I remember hiring my first XYZ, you name it, CTO, CMO, chief product officer, head of HR, legal, going through my first fundraising, all of those things, you're kind of just winging it. And more often than not, you I always say, everyone gets punched in the face. Great startups learn to duck. And so you learn that duck so you don't get that same punch. But everyone, I learned at least, was the way we learned was making mistakes. And those mistakes are painful. And so you limit those mistakes you make on the second one. You know things. You certainly have built a network. The ecosystem, especially in a venture-backed community, is somewhat small. There's only a few hundred venture capitalists, so you get a network of stuff like that. You get a network of people. In my case, we were fortunate to have an amazing team, and I was able to bring a lot of those team members over, and so I think those are things org charts, which seems, I used to always say
doesn't matter. Yeah.
Org charts is so important, but org charts, how to support, how to manage a team towards KPIs and OKRs, how to ladder those up, North Star, you know all these things, and you've been able to go through them. So, I always say, to your point, if you do a startup and you do that, let's say the worst case, and certainly Freshly was not the worst case remotely, but the worst case is you go to zero, you lose everything on that, It doesn't make any money. Well, I always say if you did it right, you save the tuition of going to Harvard, right? You say, and probably got a better tuition out of that on start. So you're net up, a few $100,000 on that, at least from that mindset. Because remember, we pay to get educated. Generally, it's in some aspects we're paying to get educated, and this is one where you're at least getting paid to educate yourself. So I think that journey, that's generally why second time, third time co-founders end up, statistically being more successful, because you're starting with that kind of heads up, that knowledge. So, but there's, you learn new things. So I think it's always, I always try to approach these things with humility, and certainly I'm a very passionate and going in, but there's way more that I still am, I'm still a student. I'm learning a lot more, and by the time I do my third and fourth, then I'll be even better. So yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about Petfolk. What is the problem that you're solving?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a bunch of problems. I think it first and foremost, it starts with the vet ecosystem, and it starts with the vet satisfaction and in their job. And I think the vet is the vet, when you think about veterinary medicine, is the key stakeholder in that. And it's a profession that over the last 20 years, for many different reasons, but one of the large ones is the way that investment has come into the category, has become a more negative industry to be in. So these, vets are generally people who have a massive vocation for what they want to do. They love animals. They love helping animals. And they're not happy. So I think the first thing that my sister's approach is, and we say is built by vets for vets. So we believe happy vets create happy pets, right? And it really comes around that. Now, from the pet ecosystem, we think the modernization of veterinary medicine is crucial. We think pets are becoming a more and more important part of our lives. They're becoming, the ownership of pets is increasing every single year, a drastic increase over COVID. As we look at mental illness, as we look at these things, pets, it's proven that if you own a pet, you're much less likely to be depressed or have anxiety. So pets are a huge calming, they're a huge part of things. Nice. People are taking longer to have kids. So our belief is that by providing better wellness, better health to pets and prolonging and certainly improving their lives, that improves pet parents' lives, and it really is that feedback loop. And what our belief is that there's so much opportunity in really modernizing the veterinary space. So it really, to us, it's about, and again, I'm ripping all these things from my sister, but it's about connected care. And connected care is this modern ecosystem of saying, I really need my vet and my vet practice to be there for me when I need them. And I need it accessible in the modalities that make sense to me today in this modern age, which is certainly sometimes in person, but a lot of times it's virtual. Got it. Sometimes it's coming to your house. So I think as we look at the evolution of where veterinary medicine is it can be a better experience. And I think so from my standpoint as a pet parent, I was just like in love with this product when my sister pitched it to me, because I was like, sign me up. I want this today. Like, this is exactly what I want with my dog. And everything feels so challenging right now with the vet ecosystem. So it's a really fun journey for me, because I'm more of an enabler on this one. It's really my sister's vision, and I get to just kind of enable it and kind of do a lot of the blocking and tackling. That's great. I have this year we got our kids a puppy for Christmas. An Aussie Doodle. Okay. Aussie Doodle Mini, technically. And his name was Sonny. He's amazing. And I was in Dallas 2 weeks ago, and I got a call from my wife that he was really sick. And it was on the weekend, so the vet was closed. And I got a call 5 hours later that he died. This was just recently, and it was really hard. Really tough news. That is horrible. I'm sorry for you and the family's loss. I think that's part of the challenge. So, not that if you were a customer of us, we could have solved that. But I think what pet parents need is, and what we offer is, when your dog's sick and it's a weekend, they need access. And whether or not it's access to a physical location, they need access to talk to someone to say, hey, here's what's going on. What do I do? Totally. Right. And so that's why virtual care, 24/7 virtual care with Petfolk, it's so important, because people just need to know, right? I always think, like, if you're not a pet owner, then you're a parent, it's basically the same as like a pediatrician, is that you don't know, your pet can't speak, you don't know how bad things are. Yeah. And it sounded like it was your guys' first pet. And so you just need that partner. And I think that was a thing for me in the ecosystem of like I had questions, and I felt like I wanted to ask someone those questions, and I felt like there was no one. Now, I was fortunate that my sister's a 28-year practicing vet, so I could just call her up and be like, here's what's going on. But like, I had a scary incident with my dog where we thought he had parvo. It ended up just being, he's a Bernese Mountain Dog. It ended up being growth pains, but he was 12 weeks old. And so, but my sister was able to, through medicine or tell advice was able to kind of say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we need to test for. Here's how you're going to do this. I'm going to call the vet. I have a friend in New York, and I'm going to coordinate this whole thing. So she quarterbacked it for me. And that was kind of my, like, and then after that incident was when she pitched me, and I was like, done. Like, this is, and she's like, this is what everyone should have. Everyone needs this kind of experience. So it's exciting. I always love a product that resonates with me as a consumer, because it's kind of easier for me to get behind. But our NPS in this, and if you would have told me we could have, we're at a 93 on NPS, which is like, Apple is 80, mid 80.
Yeah,
like,
that's insane.
We're insane, but it's really because like the expectations of pet parents is very low in the category.
Yeah.
So when you can really surprise and delight, when you can wow people, it's been, and that's an amazing, I think as a founder, whenever you create something, if people love the thing you created, it's such a great feeling for everyone, the entire team. And we've got an unreal, amazing team. So it's been fun.
I'm totally bought in. I mean, I think it was such a hopeless experience, right? Because I was in Dallas. She called me. She said, she gave this news, I think he's dead. And she's crying. The kids are crying. It was horrible for me to not be there. And I thought, man, if I was home, was there anything I could have done differently to save him? And he did have parvo, we believe. And as you know, parvo can happen fast. Yeah. And, and it was just like, she just needed somebody to like talk to. Like, who can I call? We couldn't call anybody. And we found out there was like an emergency clinic somewhere nearby, but it wasn't like close. It's like 20 minutes away. And we, by the time we like called them, they couldn't really give us much advice over the phone. They're like, you got to bring him in. She has 3 kids sitting there. It's like, so it was a very hopeless experience for her and for me, and super sad that we lost him.
I'm sorry to hear that. That's it.
But it makes this now makes Petfolk, resonate a lot with me, and I think a lot of the audience probably had experiences similar that have pets, and it's amazing. How is it doing a company with your sister, by the way?
It's been great. I think generally, if you said like co-CEOs or 2 kind of bosses, I'd say it's not going to work, because our backgrounds are so different, and because there is kind of very 2 distinct skill sets that need to happen. Is hers is 100% in the veterinary medicine, leading the practices, leading how we deliver. Her vision of how that comes alive is really hers, and I just enable that. There's a whole other side that mostly people don't, that I'm really good at, which is running kind of finance and running financing rounds and strategies, and the technology product side, and even to a degree HR, and kind of working on those things. So we work really symbiotically, and I think it's just because our verticals are so defined, and neither of us really want to.
You don't want to.
Neither of us want to go into the other vertical. We don't have the knowledge, so it's been great. And we also live. She's at our corporate headquarters, which is down in Charlotte, and I'm here in New York in a smaller kind of satellite office. So we get a little distance, so it's always helpful with siblings.
What's your growth plan? What do you want to do with this business?
Yeah, so we're opening 16 locations, or we'll be at 16 locations by the end of this year. We're opening 12 new locations. Look, our plan is to be the largest, fastest growing practice in the Southeast over the next 5-10 years. We're growing quickly, so for us, as we look at the next 10 years, it's 500 locations. For us, it's not only fast growing, but we want to be the most loved. So we kind of look at that NPS, but we're equally just obsessed with ENPS, which is employee net promoter score. And we're best in class there at a 70. So which is amazing in that category, where normally people are sitting at like 30s or 40s. So, but we're really excited. I mean, we want to bring this product to the broader America, right? Right now we're in the Southeast, so we'll continue to grow there, but it's been a great journey. It's really fun to kind of see it come alive.
Amazing. And final thing, and then we'll wrap, is I like asking, founders that come on the show, there's a lot of aspiring founders listening. What's your last final piece of advice that you would offer founders who are thinking about starting a company?
So here's always my number one piece of advice to anyone. And often you'll get people ask me a question of like, should I do this or this? And the reality is I don't know, because what you have to really do the work on is, and I would say this is a great exercise people do. Not a lot of people do it. And it takes, what's your 10-year goal? and go down and write down in 10 years, what does your life look like? And try not to do like things like, oh, I'm going to have this much money, or I'm going to have this. Now, there are some things that money gets you that, like, I'm going to have I'm going to own my own house. I'm going to have this, but like, what do you want your life to look like? Because that's what you're building towards, right? So my analogy always in this is like, if you get in a car and you don't know where you're going, like, it's going to be an interesting road trip, but and if you get in a car with someone else, and this is where I always say co-founders or spouses, right? You get in a car with someone else and you say, let's go on a road trip, and you think we're going to San Francisco and I think we're going to Miami and we're going to take turns driving, like, we're never getting anywhere, right? So I think setting that objective is really key, because you're working backwards from 10 years. And I think with 10 years gives you enough space that you can really, anything's in play, right? And 10 years, there's a lot of evidence that, like, you will drastically overpredict what you can do in a year and underpredict what you can do in 10 years. So you do that and you work backwards. So I always tell people, like you can get on this hedonic treadmill. You could get on this thing of, like, life has a way of just kind of taking you in motion. So spend the time once a year to really think through 10 years out. And because you'll grow and you'll change and you'll have kids, which is obviously like a massive change in your perspective on life. And you could tell everyone that, but until you have kids, like, you don't realize that. And so that'll change your 10-year goals. And so that's okay. It's not that your 10-year goals can't change. It's that you're always thinking through, how does life change? And again, you'll have moments and things. So I always advise founders is like, what do you want? Because, like, people will be like, should I raise venture capital? I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know what you want. And I can give you pros and cons of doing that. But, like, what do you want? And if someone's like, well, I love traveling and I want to do this and I like this, and I'm like, God, you got a great business. Get this thing cash flow and make some money and just kind of build that. That sounds like what you want. Yeah. So, that's where I always say is spend the time there. So I always advise people, spend the time to say, what do I really want? And it's okay to, like, get off the treadmill and don't want what other people want. Don't want what you see on Instagram. Don't want what you want, and really think through the harder questions of, like, what are you doing with your life? What are the things that give you value? And then you won't get it perfect. The goal is not to get perfect. There's no right or wrong in any of these. The goal is that you're thinking about it. And the goal is that you're constantly refreshing what you think about. So I love the exercise. I love it, especially for spouses, because it's a really fun conversation. Me and my wife did it. I do it fairly regularly, but you can throw in things of, like, places you want to go and trips you want and stuff like that. So it can be a fun conversation. But again, I think life is know the destination, know where you want to go, and you're a lot more likely to show up there. So, like, just start with that work is always, it's not as kind of like what people often want, which is like, just tell me if I should raise venture capital or not. And it's like, well, I'm going to have you do some work, and we'll come back and, like, visit this in a month when you've done the work. So you got to do that work sometimes first. Amazing. That's a wrap. Thank you for being here, and congrats and best of luck with the new company. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Mike.